I didn't pack a single box. I left with one duffel bag, my laptop, and a bank account my parents didn't know existed. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't leave a note. I just walked out at 6:14 on a Tuesday morning, while my mother was still asleep and my father was watching the news in the kitchen, and I drove south until Ohio disappeared in my rearview mirror. That was 4 years ago. The morning I left, I had exactly $9,000 saved. I had a job offer in Austin that I'd accepted 3 weeks earlier and told no one about. I had a plan, a lease I'd signed digitally from the parking lot of a Panera, and a very clear understanding of one thing. If I stayed one more month in that house, I would lose something I couldn't get back. I didn't know what to call it then. Now I do. It was myself. Let me back up. I'm the younger one. My brother is 3 years older, and from the time I was old enough to understand what was happening, I understood that in our house, he was the sun, and I was a planet nobody had bothered to name yet. My brother got a car for his 16th birthday. I got a handshake and a card my mother signed for both of them. My brother's college applications got reviewed by my father every single night. For 2 months, the man sat at the kitchen table with a red pen and a highlighter, like he was editing a dissertation. When my time came, I printed mine out and left it on the counter. Nobody touched it. I found it 3 days later under a pizza box. He went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship, and my parents covered the rest without blinking. I got into the University of Michigan for computer science. My mother's exact words, when I showed them the acceptance letter, were, "That's a long drive. Have you thought about staying local?" I had thought about it. I had thought about it for approximately 0 seconds. I smiled, said I'd think about it, went upstairs, and applied for every scholarship I could find. I funded my own education. Every semester. I graduated with honors and $16,000 in loans, which I paid off in 2 years once I started working. Nobody said congratulations either time. The thing about being the one who doesn't matter is that you eventually stop expecting to matter, and then something shifts. The expectation turns into fuel. I stopped wanting their approval somewhere around my junior year of college, and I started wanting something better, a life they'd have no access to. I built it quietly. I got good at my job. I moved up fast because I had nothing else to do with my time, no family drama to manage, no guilt trips to navigate, no phone calls that left me feeling hollow for 3 days. I was productive in the way that people are productive, when they've accepted that they're on their own. By the time I left, I was making good money. Not tech mogul money, but solid, real, nobody can touch me money. I'd been remote for a year and a half, which is why the move was even possible. My parents didn't know what I did for work beyond something with computers, which they said the way you'd say something with garbage disposal repair. My brother had gone into pharmaceutical sales and wore suits and drove a BMW, and that was the kind of success they understood. Mine was invisible to them, which was fine. I preferred it that way. The last real conversation I had with my father before I left was about my brother. My father called me downstairs on a Sunday and told me, with genuine feeling in his voice, that my brother had just landed a new territory, bigger commission, company car upgrade, the whole thing. He talked about it for 6 minutes. I timed it. Then he looked at me and said, "You should try to be more like him." He figured out how to make himself valuable. I was 27 years old. I had just closed a contract with a client in Seattle that was worth more annually than my brother's entire salary. I knew this because my brother had told me his salary once when he was trying to impress a girl at Christmas dinner. I did not share this information with my father. I just said, "You're right," went back upstairs, and started packing my duffel bag. I blocked their numbers 3 weeks after I moved. I know that sounds harsh. I want to be precise about why I did it. Because it wasn't impulsive. I gave it 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, my mother called me 4 times. Not once did she ask how the move went, whether I'd found my apartment okay, whether I'd eaten. Every single call started with something about my brother, his girlfriend, his job, an opinion he'd shared at dinner. I was furniture, she was dusting. I blocked them on a Wednesday afternoon and went back to work. My brother tried twice. I let those go to voicemail. The first one was awkward, stilted, like he was reading from a script my parents had written. He said they were concerned. The second one, a week later, was shorter. He said, I don't really know what's going on, but I hope you're okay. That one I listened to 3 times. It sounded like him, the real him. The brother who used to let me sit in his room when I was 9 and we'd watch movies on his laptop. But I was too raw to sort out what was real and what was my parents operating him like a remote control. I let it go. For 2 years, nothing. I built my life. I made friends in Austin, real ones. The kind you make when you're not performing a family role. I started running. I adopted a cat named Invoice, which my coworkers found funnier than I expected. I got promoted twice, and quietly negotiated my salary up to a number that made me feel, for the first time in my life, genuinely untouchable. I didn't think about home much. When I did, it was the way you think about a bad weather system that passed you. Note that it happened, you're glad it's over, you move on. Then, 14 months ago, my brother found me on LinkedIn. He didn't send a connection request, he sent a message. I saw the notification, and my stomach dropped in a way I hadn't felt in years. I let it sit for 4 days before I opened it. It said, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I don't blame you. I've been thinking a lot about everything. I'm not writing because Mom and Dad asked me to. I'm writing because I've been having some conversations with a therapist, and she thinks I should reach out. You don't have to respond. I just wanted you to know I'm sorry for not being there when it mattered. I hope Austin is good." I read it 6 times. I wrote back 4 days later. 1 sentence. "What do you want to talk about?" He responded within an hour. He said he wanted to understand what happened from my side, because he'd spent a long time only hearing one version. We agreed to a phone call. I gave him my new number, and we talked for 2 hours on a Sunday. It was strange, like talking to someone I used to know who'd been living in a parallel universe. He was careful with me. He asked questions. He actually listened. By the end of it, I didn't fully trust him, but I didn't hate him either. We talked every other week for about 2 months. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. He talked about his therapist a lot. He talked about realizing, in his 30s, that his relationship with my parents had its own problems, different from mine. But there, he said my mother called him 3 times a week minimum and it had been wrecking his marriage. He said my father had borrowed money from him twice in the last year and paid it back in the form of my father, telling everyone at family dinners what a generous son he had. He laughed when he said it, but it wasn't a real laugh. Then, about 6 weeks into our calls, he said something that changed everything. He said my parents had told him, a few months after I left, that I'd reached out asking for money, that I'd called my mother crying, said I was in trouble financially, and they'd helped me get back on my feet. He said they'd told the whole extended family this. His voice was careful when he said it, like he was waiting for me to explode. I didn't explode. I went very still the way I do when I'm processing something that doesn't compute. I had never called my mother crying. I had never asked them for a single dollar. Not once in my entire adult life. The last money that had moved between us was the $200 I paid back to my father at 22 for a car repair he'd covered when I was 19 and hadn't let me forget for 3 years. I had records of that transfer. I keep records of everything. Old habit. Developed early. When you grow up knowing you'll need to be your own proof of things. I asked my brother to tell me exactly what he'd been told. He did. According to my parents, I had called around 6 months after I moved to Austin, said I was behind on rent, said work wasn't going well, and asked for help. They said they'd wired me $3,000 and that I'd thanked them and things had been fine since. They'd used this story, this complete fabrication, to explain the silence. She got what she needed and went quiet. They had made me look like a selfish daughter who takes money and disappears. I pulled up my bank records on my laptop while he was still talking. I screenshot every single transaction from that period and emailed them to him while we were on the phone. I narrated it in real time. Here is my income from that month. Here are my expenses. Here is my account balance, which was never in any distress. Here is the absence of a single incoming wire from any account associated with our parents. Look at the dates. Look at the numbers. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "They told me the same story in 3 different versions. I should have realized the versions kept changing." We stayed on the phone for another hour. We weren't crying, neither of us are criers. We were just two people sitting with the weight of a lie that had been floating over a family for 4 years, finally naming it out loud. But that wasn't even the whole thing. A few weeks after that call, my brother did something I didn't ask him to do. He started paying attention. He said his therapist had told him that people who lie about one thing usually lie about more, and that if he wanted a real relationship with me, he owed it to both of us to get the full picture. So he started asking questions. He went through his own records. He had a long, uncomfortable conversation with our aunt, who is my mother's sister, and who had always been a little suspicious of my parents' version of events. What he found was this: our parents had used him too. Different mechanism, same function. For years, my brother had been quietly absorbing the costs of things my parents framed as family expenses. A water heater, they said, was an emergency he'd paid. A car repair for my mother he'd paid. 2 years ago, my father had sat him down very seriously and said that my mother needed a medical procedure that insurance wouldn't fully cover, that it was time-sensitive, and that they were a little short. My brother had transferred $8,000. He had done it because that's what you do. It's your mother. It's a medical emergency. You help. He asked my father recently, carefully, what procedure it had been, framing it as concern about her ongoing health. My father gave him a vague answer about her back. My mother, asked separately, gave a completely different answer about her knee. When my brother pressed gently, with documentation he'd pulled from conversations, neither of them could produce a consistent story. He hired a medical billing consultant. I know that sounds extreme. His therapist had recommended someone who helped families navigate healthcare paperwork and costs, and my brother repurposed the referral. The consultant helped him request records. What they found was that there had been no major outpatient procedure, no surgery, no significant medical billing from that period at all, beyond a routine appointment. $8,000. Gone. When my brother called to tell me this, I had to sit down on my kitchen floor. Invoice came and sat on my feet. I just sat there. My parents had told him I'd taken money I never touched. My parents had taken money from him under a medical pretext that didn't exist. They had been running 2 different extraction operations on 2 different children and using each of us as cover for the other. My disappearing made me the cautionary tale. Look what happened when you don't stay close. His proximity made him the easy target. I wasn't angry in the explosive way. I was angry in the cold, clear way that feels like standing on solid ground after years in water. I want to be precise about what we decided, because I've seen how these stories get told, like the only satisfying ending is a dramatic confrontation, a screaming match, someone storming out. That's not what happened, and I'm not going to pretend it was. My brother and I talked about options. He consulted with an actual attorney, not a friend of a friend, a real estate and family law attorney his company used for contracts. I put together a document, not a dramatic document, just a clean one. Dates, amounts, screenshots, a timeline. Everything I kept, everything he found. The attorney reviewed it. She said what my parents had done to my brother, specifically the $8,000, had some legal weight. She used the word fraud carefully and conditionally. But she used it. We didn't file anything immediately. That's still being discussed. What we did do was this. My brother sent my parents a letter, drafted with the attorney's guidance, that laid out what we knew, what we had documentation of, and what the consequences of further contact would be. Not threatening, not emotional, just factual. The kind of letter that makes it clear that 2 people have compared notes, and the math no longer adds up in your favor. My parents called my brother 7 times in the 48 hours after that letter arrived. He didn't answer. They called our aunt. She called him, and said my mother was very upset. He said he understood, and that he hoped she felt better soon. He did not engage further. I know this because he texted me updates in real time, which I appreciated more than I could say. They haven't found my new number. I haven't given it to anyone in that family ecosystem. I'm not in a rush. There are things I want to say about my brother that don't fit neatly into a timeline. He's not perfect. He benefited for years from being the favorite, from having college paid for, from the car, from the red pen on the applications. He knows this. He said it to me directly, unprompted, and he said it without making it about what I owed him for admitting it. He said, I want you to know I know. I'm not going to ask you to just get over it because I'm being honest now. I thought that was the most adult thing I'd ever heard him say. We're still figuring out what our relationship is. We text. We've had a few more calls. He came to Austin for a work conference last spring and we had dinner. It was a little weird and also mostly normal, which felt like enough. I don't need him to be my best friend. I just needed him to be real. I think about the version of me that almost didn't leave. The one who almost stayed because it felt too hard to go, because leaving felt like giving up on something. I used to think I was giving up on my family. Now I understand I was giving up on a role, the invisible one, the comparison point, the one whose absence made everyone else look better by contrast. That's not a fit. I was done being a function. My apartment in Austin has big windows. I work from home most days and I can see the sky from my desk. I run 3 miles every morning and come back and make coffee and sit with Invoice, who is a large, opinionated gray cat who has strong feelings about my work schedule and communicates them through knocking things off shelves. I have a savings account that I look at sometimes, not because I'm anxious, but because it reminds me of all the mornings I got up and just kept building. I'm not going to tell you I've healed completely, or that I don't still have moments where I see a family at a restaurant and feel something sharp and nameless move through me. I'm not going to tell you it doesn't sometimes make me tired in a very old way, thinking about how much energy I spent being invisible in a house full of people. That stuff doesn't just evaporate, but it gets smaller. It keeps getting smaller. What I'll tell you is this. I never needed their approval to build a good life. I just needed them to stop taking up space, where that life could have been growing. Once I cleared the space, it grew. It grew fast. I also want to address something, because I know it's the question underneath all of this. People always want to know about forgiveness. Whether I forgive them. Whether I'll eventually let them back in. I've thought about it a lot. I talked about it with a therapist I found in Austin, a good one, someone who never once told me what I should feel. Here's where I landed. Forgiveness is something I'm working on for myself, not for them. It's about not carrying weight that belongs to other people. That's the work I'm doing and it's ongoing. But forgiveness, for me, doesn't mean access. It doesn't mean restored trust or reopened doors. Those things require evidence of change, and evidence takes time, and time requires safety, and there is no safety in the version of those relationships I have ever known. Maybe that changes. Probably it doesn't. I'm at peace with both outcomes. My brother asked me recently if I was happy. We were on the phone and I was sitting outside on my balcony, and the evening was warm, and Invoice was inside knocking something off the counter, and I could hear it from outside. I said yes. He said he was glad. He meant it. I could tell because he didn't follow it up with anything, just let it be a complete sentence. Sometimes that's everything. If you're somewhere right now, where I was 4 years ago, where you're so used to being the smaller one that you've started to believe it's true, I want you to hear this. The smallness was assigned to you. It's not yours. You can put it down. It will not be easy, and it will not be instant, and there will be a period where you're driving south at 6:14 inches the morning, with a duffel bag and a number in your bank account that feels too small for the distance. You're about to travel. Keep driving. The life you build on the other side of that drive is the real one. Everything else was just weather.